Old Grognard says, let's look at how surprise works in 2nd edition AD&D. Welcome back to Old Grognard says. In this game, rolling for surprise is one of the tools the DM has for setting up encounters. I like to explain surprise this way because when determining if a surprise roll is necessary, it mostly comes down to what the DM thinks is appropriate for the situation. This is why some DMs will have you rolling for surprise all the time, and others will almost never have you roll for it. Neither way is incorrect. Again, it mostly boils down to what the DM thinks is appropriate for the situation. So, I think we should start off by talking about when and if we should use the surprise roll in an encounter. For this, I think a flowchart is a good way to explain things. Even if you don't use it in game, it still explains the thought process behind if and when you should roll for surprise. So, the first thing we should determine is, are both sides aware of each other before they get at a distance at which they can interact? This often happens in open terrain where the line of sight is measured in hundreds or even thousands of yards. If this is the case, we answer yes, and we don't roll for surprise because both sides are aware of each other. If we answer no, then we go here and ask the question, is neither side aware of the other when they get into interaction distance? If we answer yes to this, then both sides roll for surprise, and it is possible for both sides to be surprised. We'll look at how that works when we get to part 3 of this video, the effects of surprise, but for now, just keep in mind that it is possible for both sides in an encounter to be surprised. If we answer no to the last question, then we end up in a situation where one side is aware and the other is not. There are a lot of things that can happen at this point. The party that is aware may decide to increase distance and avoid the other group or creature entirely. This might be the case if a low-level party happens across a red dragon and they nope out of there before it notices them. Another possibility is that the aware party sends someone to parley. They might do the Obi-Wan thing and be like, hello there, and then proceed to negotiate or whatever. Still, another possibility is that the aware party closes and attacks. If the environment allows them to close without being noticed, then the unaware party would roll to see if they are surprised. The last possibility I'm going to talk about is that the aware party could set up an ambush. A properly set up ambush has the ambush function as the trigger for the surprise roll, so it's possible to get in ambush attacks and then have a round of surprise attacks. They talk about this on page 111 of the PHB, and my guidance on this is to have one ambush attack act as the trigger before the surprise roll. I don't recommend allowing an entire round of attacks to happen and then doing the surprise roll. So, for example, the ambush attack might be a thief backstab, or the wizard hitting the front of an orcish tribute caravan with a fireball. And then you would roll for surprise and go from there. Try not to ambush the players too much, and if you allow there to be more than one attack before the surprise roll, it can feel unfair, so be careful. As a side note, when I was in the Army back in the 90s, I saw some terrifyingly effective ambushes play out once the combat arms guys figured out the tactical utility of fireballs and lightning bolts. If you have any questions about when to roll for surprise, please ask in the comments. Anyways, now that we know when to roll for surprise, let's look at how the surprise roll itself works and what modifiers we apply when rolling. When we have a group or creature roll for surprise, we roll a d10, and on a roll of 1 through 3, the group or creature is surprised. So, in other words, it's like a saving throw versus surprise, but you roll it on a d10. Now, I say group or creature because it's up to the DM if there is one roll for the group, if each character or creature rolls individually, or if just the guards or lookouts roll. Regardless of who rolls, there are modifiers to the roll, and they fall into three broad categories. And those categories are the standard modifiers, racial or creature modifiers, and dexterity modifiers. The standard modifiers can be used in any encounter where we have surprise rolls, and they can be found in Table 57, which is on page 102 of the DMG. Examples of these are if one party is invisible, or maybe the party making the roll has reason to be suspicious. They're like those guys in the Metal Gear games where they have question marks over their heads. But, anyways, if the modifiers work out where there's no chance of surprise, then the group or creature isn't surprised. Nowhere in the book, as far as I've read, says that you're always surprised on a roll of one or anything like that. So, if the modifiers make surprise impossible, you don't roll and they just aren't surprised. Don't worry too much about if you're applying these modifiers correctly, incorrectly, or really at all. A lot of DMs don't even know this table exists, or they do know and they just ignore it, and their games work just fine. Okay, so let's look at creature or racial modifiers. Part of what gave me the idea for this video in the first place was that the last video I made, where I was talking about Dark Sun elves and their ability to inflict -4 on the other party's surprise rolls in certain situations. Some monsters also have abilities like this. So, for example, bugbears like to ambush their enemies, and they inflict a -3 penalty to surprise rolls if the situation arises. Regardless of whether it's a player character, race, or monster, if they get a racial bonus to surprise, it'll be listed in their description. The last modifier we'll look at is the dexterity modifier to surprise rolls. These are on page 14 of the PHB on table 2, under where it says reaction adjustment. If the reaction adjustment is positive, you add it to the surprise roll, and if it's negative, you subtract. It may seem odd to us nowadays that the surprise adjustment is dexterity based instead of some kind of awareness ability like you would see in more modern game design. The folks who wrote these rules consumed a lot of fiction like westerns where fast drawing gunfighters are able to counter an ambush by just being lightning fast, or samurai and kung fu movies where basically the same thing happens, but it's a sword or maybe a dodge instead of the gunfighter doing a fast draw. So, in other words, it isn't that the character notices the ambush early, but that they react quickly enough to render it ineffective. So, now that we know how the surprise roll works and when to use it, let's look at what the effects of surprise are. On page 112 of the PHB, there's a block of text that covers the effects of surprise, and the first paragraph reads, "Characters and monsters that are surprised all suffer the same penalty. They are caught off guard and thus cannot react quickly. The surprising group receives one round of attacks with melee, missile, or magical items. They cannot use these moments of surprise to cast spells." I want to focus really quick on the part that says they cannot use these moments of surprise to cast spells. You can interpret this two different ways. You can either say that this only applies if the surprising group mentioned earlier also made a surprise roll and wasn't surprised, or you can say that it always applies even if the surprise is the result of an ambush. What you do with that is up to you. I'm just letting you know that this block of text exists. The next part of the text gives an example of what a party can do if they surprise another group. A ranger on the unsurprised side could fire his longbow twice, 2 attacks per round, before his opponents could even hope to react. A fighter, able to attack twice per round, could attempt both hits before any initiative dice are rolled. A mage could unleash a bolt from his wand of lightning before the enemy knew he was there. It goes on after this to tell us that this also applies to monsters when they surprise the player characters. The next part of the text tells us that another effect of surprise is that while characters are surprised, they lose their dexterity-based AC bonuses. It doesn't say anything about losing dexterity bonuses to saving throws, but if you want to run it that way, I guess you could. Just keep in mind that most enemies don't have dexterity scores, so this would mostly affect the players and not most monsters. The last couple of points made in this section are that the surprising party can choose to flee during the surprise round, and that if both parties are surprised, the surprise basically cancels out. Outside of this block of text, there are a couple of other things mentioned. On page 90 of the PHB, there's table 51, combat modifiers, and it mentions that you get a +1 to attack rolls versus surprised creatures. On a previous page, it also mentions that surprised characters and monsters have a decreased chance of making successful saving throws, but it doesn't mention how this works. As a general rule, the DM can modify saving throws by anything from -4 to +4 based on circumstances, and you could rule that it's a flat -1 to saving throws to go along with the +1 bonus to hit against surprised enemies. If you have any questions, again, feel free to ask in the comments. Before I go, I'd like to show you guys one of the old Pulp magazine covers I found a while back. I know I already showed this one in the community section, but I really like it. One of the games I play a lot is Fallout 4, and I have a hard time believing that the devs have never seen this one. It's pretty much like someone saw this and said, hey, let's make a whole Fallout game out of this. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating, but you know where I'm coming from. Anyways, I just thought I'd share, and if you'd like to share your thoughts on this or something surprise related again, feel free to post in the comments. Okay, that's all I got, and with that, have yourself a wonderful rest of your day.